Molly is a lawyer by training and an artist who focuses her work with organizations going through significant change and individuals engaging about their end-of-life experience. She has advanced certifications in mediation and critical incident response. She has served as a hospice volunteer in the Sutter Health System for over 30 years, in the emergency room, as a chaplain, and now in the intensive care unit. Molly leads a program called Conversations About Death, where participants use art to gain greater access to their fears, values, and legacy in order to prepare for their end-of-life experience. She facilitates with private clients and families to help set advanced directives, have satisfying conversations, and create legacy materials such as memory quilts, written statements, or stories and art created from family mementos. And you can learn more about Molly's work at her website, which is mollystuart.com, and Stuart is spelled with a U, S-T-U-A-R-T, mollystuart.com. I first got acquainted with Molly through the virtual Death Cafe that I've been leading for several months now. Molly has been a participant quite a few times in the Death Cafe, and she always has, when she speaks, she always has something valuable and helpful to say. And I was really impressed with hearing her comments and hearing about the workshops that she's done. So I looked up her website and decided it would be great to have her do an interview with us today. So Molly, thank you for being here and welcome.
Yes, thank you. I'm so excited to be here and even more excited to have the visual aspect of our presentation today.
Yes, I'm really thrilled about that too, and glad that we got to try the slides, especially because your workshops involve art. It's just so helpful for people to be able to view the art rather than just hearing about it. But before we dive into the slideshow, I wanted to just ask you a couple of questions, because I've been really curious about the fact that you're a lawyer and an artist, and I really want to know how you got started in the work you're doing today, because I'm just curious, did you become a lawyer first, or were you an artist first, and how do you put all that together?
Yeah, I guess it actually is very challenging how to put it all together. I guess I would have to say I was an artist first, because I think you're sort of born an artist.
That's true.
And
probably not born a lawyer.
not quite in the same way, for sure, that is. But I think we sort of go down a traditional path, and so, I went to college, and then the question is, what's the next thing? And the thing that was really engaging to me about the law was how many questions were involved in it. And it was a law school in particular, was a long conversation about what our society should be like and how it should be structured and how our government and our rules should support what's meaningful to us, and kind of in a very parallel way, I think it turns out, looking back on it all, in a sort of parallel way about what we want our life to be and what our values are and what decisions and rules and guidelines we're going to use to make our life valuable in the same way that we try to make our society valuable to us. So I found that sort of parallel. The thing that was different was I found about the law that it was almost entirely an intellectual exercise about what was right and wrong, and that my artist soul, I guess I would say, missed sort of the emotional part about what really matters to people, how their motivations aren't always so logical, things like that. And so for my own personal balance, I guess I would say, as I got deeper into working in the law, I also got deeper in trying to explore myself and the world in an artistic way instead of an intellectual way, or in addition, I guess I would say, in an intellectual way.
Well, I have to say, I love the fact that you are a lawyer and you're having conversations with people about the end of life because you understand the legal aspects of creating advance directives, and you understand, and choosing a healthcare proxy and those things. I think it's just so helpful as a physician trying to encourage patients to create an advance directive. I can discuss the medical aspect, but I'm clueless about the legal aspect of what they do. So I find it wonderful to know that you're there able to really counsel people on the legal side of things and helping them walk through that.
Well, thank you, and that is true, and I'll be curious maybe a little bit to hear about how you handle it in the medical arena. I don't actually practice law, so I am very careful when I'm meeting with people individually to say, although I understand what the law is about advance directives and the implications of it in the medical arena, I'm not really giving any kind of legal advice to people about what they should do. Now, advance directives always are available to the layperson, to any non-lawyer is allowed and encouraged to fill out their advance directive. And even when people receive help from hospitals or hospice or nursing homes and things like that, lawyers are not at all required. But it does help because there are so many different pieces of the language, living wills and proxies and just kind of vocabulary that people aren't always familiar with. It's nice to have that background to help translate, I guess I would say.
Yes, absolutely. And then just one other component that I picked up on from your website is that you do work with organizations that are going through major change and transition. And it hadn't occurred to me before how in many ways organizations might need some grief counseling and need assistance with that process, just as we individuals do as our lives change, but that an organization could actually have a need for that as well, someone to help guide them through the process.
Yeah, it's very true, and it's a striking parallel, I really would say, for either the end-of-life process or any other major change. Some of us are going through sort of midlife changes and that same kind of thing. Who am I going to be next after this thing has happened to me, after I've lost my job or my spouse has died or my children have gotten married or whatever kind of major change in your life? Similar things happen in corporations. A CEO drops dead and all the employees are terrified about what their future looks like and uncertain, or a leader steals money and the people feel insecure about their safety and what the future is going to hold for them. So really, when I now sort of, again, looking back on it, think about how all of these things fit together, it really is a kind of process that is applied to any situation of change that's very, has some really common elements to it, no matter what kind of change you're going through, what kind of change an organization is going through, which always involves people's experience of change as well. So I have focused because I kind of, like the excitement. I focused on situations of change that are kind of dramatic in people's life, when there is some kind of major crisis in a corporation, or when we're talking about an end-of-life change. But for the most part, the process really applies anywhere in life when anybody is kind of just making a shift to a new reality for them.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's really fascinating, and I've just been so interested to hear you talk a little bit more about these different components of your work, and I really admire you for pursuing art as your passion and your love, and then finding a way to incorporate it in the rest of the work that you do. I think that's wonderful. So as we get ready to dive into the slides here that Molly has for us and the presentation, Molly has invited anyone listening to feel free to ask questions as we go, especially because your questions might pertain to a particular slide or a subject that we're on. So I'll remind you again, if you're only listening by computer, and you can type in a question in the question box down in the corner and submit it, and I'll read the question out loud. And if you're listening over the phone, your phone lines are all muted right now, but you can push *2 on your own phone, and that will indicate to me that you have a question. Then I'll unmute your line so you can ask Molly questions or make comments as we go. So let's go ahead and dive into your slides, Molly.
Okay, that sounds great. So this first slide is just some contact information about me. If you're interested in following up with anything or sending me a question or email, I'd be happy to talk some more with you. This first slide is dark a little bit, and it's actually two pictures mixed together, and Karen usually starts these conversations with, how did you get involved in this? So here are some pictures of how I started really on a very low-key way in my neighborhood. I'd read an article about tiny libraries that people were putting up, which were collections of books from the neighbors where you could take a walk on by and pick out a book or put your extra books in there and share them around the neighborhood. And I live in a great walking neighborhood and have a beautiful garden, and so I put a tiny library up in my yard and got a great deal of fun attention from folks. And then I read in the newspaper this idea that was going around, which was a list that said, before I die, I want to, and then a list of blanks. And so because I've been doing death work and end-of-life care for a long time, I thought, well, this will be interesting. Not only will I get to see what books my neighbors read and what they don't want to read, but to get some ideas about what's really meaningful to them. So on top of the tiny library, I put this blank list and a big felt tip marker, and my neighbors walked by and put down the things that matter to them. Before I die, I want to see a tornado or fall in love or own a horse or write a book or visit the mountains, travel the world. So I started really this project with this great infusion of inspiration about how people really were trying to live their life and what was really meaningful and filled with hope about them. And it was for me a way to really engage with my neighbors and my neighborhood in kind of community more than I had felt before, both with the library and the Before I Die poster. Then I heard about this is the next slide for those of you who aren't on. I heard about a movement going around, started in England, and actually participated, as Karen said, with her virtual Death Cafe, but this idea of Death Cafe where people simply got together and talked about their ideas. And the original model of Death Cafe is very non-directed, that people could just simply get together in a group and talk about whatever. There isn't particularly a leader of that. And I had, again, I have a big garden, and so I had these Death Cafe meetings in my garden. And there were some very kind of spiritual times when we were together, and then there were also situations that were filled with very kinds of practical questions. Because the format purpose of this Death Cafe is there isn't really a leader, and already there's a little bit of a leadership role when you're a host. I'm sure you have this experience too, Karen, about providing medical opinions, but it was difficult to remain not really answering questions about work in the ICU, answering questions about how people manage pain and end of life, answering some legal questions, kinds of things in the Death Cafe movement, and I didn't really want to taint, I guess, the idea by having it be more directed. So I then started this program that I call Conversations About Death, because I really do like the idea that none of us are really experts. We're just talking about what matters to us, so we're experts of our own experience, but not of the overall experience. So I prepared some initial questions to help people get started talking about what their experience in the past so far with death has been like, and really just kind of as prompts to start conversations about common experiences that many of us have had. So one of the most common metaphors and parallels that we talk about in the dying experience is things about birth. So many people that come to these classes about Conversations About Death have had experiences about birth. There's many people who are parents. There's many people who have been with people who've given childbirth. And so it's a good way to sort of explore in a non-scary way the idea of this sort of massive change of life. Then many people also have had experiences where they've had to withdraw life support for someone, and they know some of the pressures of the system of how that is. Sudden death is also an area where people have a lot of really intense experiences. So I propose these questions, and then that basically just gets the conversation started, you might say. Then in the class, the Conversations About Death class is actually a 3-part class. We meet once a week for 3 weeks in a row and have some exercises and thought things to do in between. But it's also very, kind of like I said about my background in the law, it's sort of a very intellectual exercise. We open up to what our practical experience has been. We move on in the next class to talking about how people die, what it's really like, what people are really experiencing, despite the fact that we in America all want to die in the comfort of our homes. Nearly none of us get to do that, despite the fact that most of us say that we don't want a lot of heavy intervention in ICUs. Many of us experience that. So I kind of, again, in a very rational way, bring up some of the practical actual things that are happening in the world around end of life these days. And then how people die, what are we likely to experience in terms of our the demise of our bodies? Is it going to be long and dragged out? Will it be quick? Will there be time to say goodbye? Will we feel nauseous and sick at the end? Will we be in severe pain? How is it likely to unfold? Again, in a very statistical and kind of intellectual way. And then the end result of that class, in my hope, is that people are motivated at that time to consider filling out an advance directive. And many people do, and many people are at least interested in doing that and then have more questions. I also have the experience, because I'm in the ICU, that an advance directive is a kind of a crutch/bandage for the idea that now everything's resolved and we're going to know what to do in the last several weeks of life. It is a very useful document as someone who understands the law. It's very important to have a real legal document because doctors are afraid of being sued and hospitals are afraid of being sued. So it's really important to say what matters. On the other hand, the questions that really come up in an ICU when someone really is at the end of life, or in a hospice, or even at home in their own bed, are much more complex than any advance directive ever contemplated. So although I'm satisfied when people come out of the class having filled one out and started their thought process, I also feel like it's not a very strong demonstration of people's individual rights. So in addition to that, go ahead. Yeah.
I just wanted to interrupt briefly, Molly, because this came up in one of our Death Cafe discussions, that for all of us trying to anticipate what we might want at the end of life, it's very difficult to sit where we are right now, and never having been in a terminal state before to really predict and know what it is we will want. And you were validating that in your experience, sometimes people change their minds, and when they're in the emergency room or in the hospital, they may have an advance directive, but they may say, no, I want you to do everything. They may change their mind because of fear in the moment, or just because the experience is so different than what they imagined it would be, that they might make the choice to do everything you can right now.
Yes, and that's very true, and that's even a third element of the complexity and difficulty of advance directives. And also the good part, right? I mean, one thing is that we don't want to sign some legal document and have someone not honor our wishes to be taken care of in the last moment. So it's nice that there is some flexibility. But I think the thing that's complicated is that people are signing these without even really understanding what they're agreeing or not agreeing to. So it's not, in a way, not very effective to sign a document that you don't understand, so that when the real critical time comes, you say, well, I didn't know what I was doing and now I want to do something else. That's not the way we want to have it unfold. We like to have it unfold so that the person can most closely deepen their understanding of what really matters to them, so that when they're making these decisions in times of crisis, they are in alignment with their values. And that's, as we talked about in your introduction, that's really one of the fundamental pieces of change for anyone, for people going through midlife crisis or for their companies that are going through stress, is what are our core fundamental values that will be consistent no matter what our life circumstances are. And so instead of just filling out a form that says, I want you to keep me on intubation and pain medication for 72 hours and then pull the plug, instead of that statement, what we can say is, what's really important to me is to have 72 hours to spend time with my family and say my goodbyes. That's what my value is. And so now whatever circumstance comes up, if it's that chemotherapy is going to wipe you out, or pain medications wipe you out, or death is going to wipe you out before you have that opportunity, you can make little tiny individual choices all along the way that are in alignment with your values, as opposed to this one big sort of advanced directive choice that's based kind of on statistical likelihoods. And then that is why people panic when they start gasping for breath at home, even though they wanted to die in their own bed, because that's not what they were talking about when they said, don't, take me to the ICU. They weren't really talking about that.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Well, it's just such a good point that it's not simply a matter of having everyone sign the document. It's a matter of having everyone really think about what's the core value of what they're searching for. And I know before my mom died, when I was helping her fill out an advance directive, and we got completely lost in discussing, would you want dialysis if this happened? Well, in this case, would you, we were talking about all the intricacies of these choices and the details, and it was just overwhelming and too much to even think about. And finally, I just said, Mom, when you think about the time when you die, what do you envision? And she said, oh, well, that's easy. I want to be home in my own bed. I'd like to be comfortable, and I'd like you to be with me. And it was like, okay, that's it. That's your advance directive right there. Right. And then that wish of hers guided every single decision we had to make. When she was in the hospital and the surgeons were saying we could do surgery, but at her age and as frail as she is, there's a high likelihood that she could die either during surgery or from complications shortly after. We decided no, because she wants to be home, and that's too high a risk that she'll die in the hospital. So no surgery. We're going home instead. And you're right. Knowing that that's ultimately how she wanted it to be helped us make all the other decisions in between that needed to be navigated.
Exactly. And you can't and you don't want to sit around and anticipate every possible scenario that's going to be your demise. I mean, you don't want to anticipate that it might turn out that actually you got hit by a car at 62 and now you're on life support, or that you just don't want to think about all of them. What you want is to have a core set, again, sort of a process almost. These are the things that matter to me, and therefore these are the things that will guide my decisions along the way.
And Molly, we have a question that was typed in by Gail from Staten Island, New York. And she asked, are you finding that advance directives are not being upheld by the healthcare proxy? She says, I'm hearing more and more stories about this due to the healthcare proxy not agreeing with the wishes of the patient once the patient can no longer communicate. Have you had any experience with that, Molly?
I haven't seen something so straightforward as that kind of objection to it. What I do see often are two different things. One is the way that much of the medical industry passes on information and asks questions from lay people. So, for example, in the ICU, in many cases that would seem to most people who'd filled out an advance directive and said that they wanted to die at home would be kind of hopeless cases where it was time to, get them home. The medical industry will say something to the effect of, well, what we normally would do next is a CT scan to find out why they're unconscious. And so then a family member or proxy says, well, normal, and this is what we normally do, and we do try to find out information, and I do feel paralyzed because I don't know what's going on, so okay, a CT scan. And then the next thing they say is, well, we see something on the CT scan, so maybe we want to do this procedure or that. So I feel like proxies get seduced / pulled along in directions that they might not otherwise have because of just the power of the river of the medical industry flowing the way it flows. And then I think there's another thing which I talk about a lot in my class because I think it's a very complicated issue for people is many people put their children on as the person who should make the decisions, and Karen, you might want to speak to this. And in one way, it makes perfect sense. Who else would be both alive, younger than you, and therefore still alive at the time that you're doing this, and the most likely to want the best for you? So it makes perfect sense. However, many children, even children over 50 or 60 or whatever we are not really ready to say, okay, right now my mom is alive, and after I sign this document, my mom's going to be dead. Mm-hmm. And so that just unbelievable, unreal shift in reality for a person who has to make that decision that changes anyone they care about from alive to dead is such a huge decision that, yes, I would say many proxies kind of back off from what they thought they agreed to do in terms of helping someone come to a peaceful end, and instead are more likely to grasp at things.
Mm-hmm. And I can say from my personal experience that taking my mom home, it was one of the best things I've ever done, but one of the hardest things I've ever done. And one of the things in the middle of the night when I was sitting at her bedside at home, I'm questioning, oh my gosh, was this really the right thing to do? Like if she were still in the hospital, we'd have nurses and aides, we'd have people around. I'd have help. I wouldn't be here alone with her questioning everything I think and every decision I'm making. And so I can say, even with a lot of hospice background and training and all of my beliefs, it was extremely hard to make that choice.
Yes, it is. It is extremely hard, much more hard, in my experience, much more hard than for the person who's actually dying. I would say I have never been around a person who was in their last 24 hours of dying who didn't seem like they were totally okay with it. And I have lots of times been around people who intended fully to honor their loved one's wishes by not intervening, and have felt just crumbled by both sides of the experience, by either pulling the plug, so to speak, or by getting medical care that they sort of knew they didn't want to. The confusion and uncertainty it wreaks havoc no matter which decision.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think you're exactly right.
Yeah, it's very hard. So thank you for that question. I do sometimes sound a little dark about all this, so I hope that didn't demoralize you. Nevertheless, here's what I'll add, my happy thought. Nevertheless, every single thing that you do, every conversation you have, every document you sign, every note that you write down brings you and those around you closer to some kind of comfortable reassurance that the right thing is happening. Mm-hmm. So do whatever you can stand to do. That would be my advice. As much as if it's even a blank advance directive form, if it's one conversation over Thanksgiving dinner, it just gives more solidity and confidence to whatever happens after that. So do whatever you can. Okay.
There's one more question from Karen in Oak Harbor, Washington, and she asked if you could talk a little bit about the post form physician's orders for life-sustaining treatment used for terminally ill folk. And she says, it seems wise that the carbon copy be carried by patients and copies made for family members.
Yeah, I would say absolutely. And the Pulse, I would say, is a more, even slightly more strong and more effective document. However, in California anyway, and I think everywhere, it only can be enacted if a doctor feels like the patient is within 1 year or sometimes 6 months of death. So because what it is when doctors write a legal, what they call order, so the doctor says in a legal manner, this person should have this medicine, or this person should have this treatment, or this person should have this test, or whatever it is. The doctor is, essentially because of the value of their medical license, is writing a legal directive for this medical care to be engaged in. So not like an advance directive, which is a lay person's, the family members have signed a legal document that says we want this. There's no obligation of anybody to follow that document. It's just a statement of what you want. In terms of the pulse, you and the doctor, or the patient and the doctor, have gotten together and you've agreed, when this medical thing happens to me, then the doctor's order for what should be done is X, and then the doctor signs that, and it becomes a legal promise by the doctor to behave in a legal way when that thing happens. So it's strong, and those things usually are things about more pain relief, morphine, and to not resuscitate, to not do surgery, sometimes to not give antibiotics, things. So it's really a legal contract agreement between the doctor and the writing of medical orders so that certain things will or will not be done. Whereas the advance directive is just a statement, if this happens, I don't really want this done. But it's not an agreement with anybody. So they're more effective, but they can't be implemented, pulsed can't be implemented until the doctor believes that there is an impending death, not just, when you're 56 years old and someday you might die.
So thanks for clarifying that, Molly. And somehow I'm not seeing a slide, but is this just a blank slide? I just see a white screen.
Okay. I'm not seeing it. Okay, great. Here we are.
Go. Yay.
Okay. Yeah. So now we're shifting a little. So I've had this 3-part class. People have come to this 3-part class. It's very practical. They're all scared because they are all thinking about how they might die and how they don't really get to die at home even if they want to, and how advance directives don't really help even if they want to, blah, blah, blah. And they're now faced with this question, as you said, Karen, where you don't really know how you're going to die. And you don't really know which things, and you haven't really died before, so you don't know how scared to be about it. And there's just all of this emotion and experience and sort of more personal things that are picked up by this kind of practical conversation. In addition to that, I've done a lot of different kinds of teaching for a lot of different people, and especially adults. And one of the things that's really critical is that you don't just learn things in your brain. You also learn things through art and through music and through emotion and through just connecting to other ways of getting information. So because I'm an artist and because I believe that people learn things through performing artistic deeds, that it's sort of that creative process unleashes things, and because it creates space in a way where your brain, which wants to know factual information, still cannot answer these questions about what death is like or what pain is like, or, there's things that our brain just really cannot grasp and grapple with. And so what I did when I found all these people going through the first part of the class and then just sort of being left afloat with this practical but not very, in a way, connecting sort of experience, was then I followed up with developing this class by using art to sort of get in more to deepen. Instead of just this form, now we have this idea about some thoughts about what we're losing, about meaning and what's meaningful to us in our lives, about what things we regret. And a lot of what people struggle with over their dying is the fear of what they're going to get to their deathbed regretting, and whether there's anything that one can do about that during their lifetime. And then questions of legacy. And so for many people, that legacy is simply that they want to leave their children better informed about what their wishes are, so that it's easier on their children to go through the process of letting them go in the way that they want to be dealt with. Some of them are, like I said, art projects and things they want to divvy up their stuff or clean out their basement or move to a smaller home or things like that, write a book, create a scrapbook, whatever sorts of legacy projects. And that helps people feel connected across time. Even if I lose this experience of being alive in this lifetime, there is something that continues for all of us. And I think for many people, that experience at whatever spiritual or non-spiritual level it is, whether it's that our DNA is in the, the giant redwoods, or whether that we're part of the stardust of the universe, no matter where that feeling is, having a connection across beyond ourselves is something that's very important to human beings. So this idea of legacy at whatever level, whether it's giving away your photographs or being connected across time, is a really important idea for people. This is my art studio. This is where I often have the classes. People come usually in groups of 6 or 8. People come, and I have a bunch of different rooms around that we do this in. We break up sometimes and regather. We also do homework sort of experiences where you gather things at home. Oftentimes we do this class in the evening. This is a daytime picture of the studio, but oftentimes we're here in the evening. This is my garden where again, I said we break out into these buildings, so that's a picture of one building, but I have 4 little buildings around, and it's about an acre, and there's some walking paths, and there's some solitude places. So we do some, kind of meditative exercises and some places where we separate and rejoin each other and, create space to be more creative and more introspective. This is a flyer for the first class I did when I started incorporating arts, and I wrote a grant, and I got a grant from the Arts Commission and the Poetry Center, and I had a local poet come and participate in the facilitation. And so in addition to art projects of our own, in a way that music and poetry and writings of, great learners across time sort of brings wisdom to us, I incorporated some, writings and quotations and things, and some reading of poetry. Then the primary focus of the class is what these art boxes, and these are collections that I both, wherever I am, like buying dried milk, or anywhere else, pick up just boxes that seem interesting to me. And I also invite people who are in the class to bring boxes of our own. And they're essentially the foundation of then what we do in the class. And we'll see some pictures later, but I go off in a variety of different ways. Sometimes the boxes are basically a container, like your treasured shoebox or trunk in the attic of things that are meaningful to you in your life, and people put stuff in there. Sometimes we have a project where we decorate the boxes themselves into something meaningful, but I usually start with this sort of container idea. I think it helps people embody themselves, like envision how there is this wall/container, really, that is who we are as living beings, and there's lots of elements inside of it, and so we kind of use that as a metaphor through the class. Here's some other examples of some boxes. There's a giant cigarette box you can see in there. There's a cigar box. Lots of people bring food boxes, just, a variety of things. Many times they try to bring a box that's emblematic of something, starting right off, emblematic of something meaningful or significant in their life. There's some more. There's in the background there, you can't really see, but there's a big hard case bowling ball bag or case, and somebody had been a bowler, and they took their bowling ball out and then decorated that box as part there. And as an artist, I have, and because I'm a collage artist in particular, I'm sort of stuck in my studio because I have gazillions of pieces of paper of things. And this is just a photograph of some of the things we use. I have lots of old maps, and so I bring maps out, and people often find that place is a very meaningful thing to explore in their thoughts about their life and what matters to them. Often nature places in particular. I get a lot of people who spent time in national forests or vacationed at, wildlife areas that are meaningful. In the back of that picture are a whole bunch of sheets from sewing pattern books, and what I did was cut out all the sheets that were for Halloween costumes. And so one piece of our exercise thing is to essentially pick an alter ego or some kind of, costumed sort of character about who you are and what your energy is, or, who you are in another life, or we do a variety of things like that. But interacting with the idea of identity and who we represent to the outside world and who we are more behind the costume, so to speak. Here's another picture of other materials. I use save old phone books. A lot of people that are here, my class is in Sacramento often, and so the Sacramento phone book will have neighbors or their family names or things like that. Dictionaries. These are examples of tarot cards and cards from Monopoly. Whenever I see an old game at a thrift store or whatever, I buy it up and just have all these kinds of old cards that sometimes are reflective of things that matter to people. And when we do the larger projects, they add color and laughter and inspiration to people's experience. This is an example of an exercise I do that's called What Color is the Afterlife? And so on one of the, again, to inspire just sort of a more creative and non-linear experience, I ask that question, and the people go out in the world and they rip pages out of magazines. In this case, there's some pictures of paint chips from the Home Depot or wherever paint store. And then in the global and wrap-up thing, it provides this spots of color, just as an artistic thing. It provides spots of color, and it also can often create sort of a revelation of your, the thinking of your trend. If much of your experience and color of the afterlife and all of the little your game cards and your maps and all the things that have to do with your experience of being dead have a darkness about them, then that's revealing to people. And if all of the things that have to do with your family have a lightness and joy about them, then that helps explore and explain to you and the people that love you about, what's meaningful and therefore sometimes how to proceed. I have another exercise I do called Here and Now I Am ... And I have zillions of old postcards from all over everywhere, and I put giant stacks of them around and just kind of smear them open. Then I ask people to pick out a scene. Oftentimes it's not a scene of an actual place where they have been or want to be, but more, as you can kind of see from these, just maybe a feeling, that peaceful sunset or a Japanese temple or whatever. But sometimes it's a real place. I really want to go to Spain. And then on the back side of the postcard, to envision and answer that question, and now I am on this street corner or in this temple, and this is what's happening to me, and this is my experience. So again, it's a very open-ended way to sort of ask people what matters to them. If they could be in any place, what would they choose and what would be their experience there? And then they have that postcard that they can put in their box that kind of, again, reminds them of things that are meaningful across their lifetime and in their hopes. I also ask people to bring pictures from their, photo album or things that they ripped out of magazines that are interesting to them. Somebody put this one in of all these cats at the door. Hi, we understand you're 40 and still not married. Somebody has, now this is in their box. Now they have a reason to notice something about what's meaningful in their life or painful, perhaps. So the things that I have a sign up that says what we notice is what we become. So if you have this tendency to notice certain things, and now you're ripping ideas out of magazines and going through your pictures and pulling out quotes or famous writings, then it can't help but start being revealed who you are and what matters to you just simply by the things that you choose to pick up or take notice of. So adventure, sometimes the question about photos is your favorite adventure or something you were proud of or whatever, but photos people bring. Quotations, I ask people to bring out quotations, and here's just two examples, and I really love this one. What is required more than anything is a bravery that is beyond human comprehension. I just wanted to hear Sal telling me where I was going was okay and not to be afraid. So again, nobody would ever say that, right, in the class where we're talking about, the rate of cancer and what they're thinking about, what they want their last moments to be. But someone can look out at the world and they can read a magazine article about someone, or they can just find a statement that says, wow, this is a piece of this dying process that's really important to me. And it's revealed because of what they see and choose to focus on. Here's an example of the boxes after they're kind of finished. So in this class, the people decorated their actual boxes. This box was first, during the early parts of the class, just filled with these photos and scraps and postcards and quotes and things like that, and then later built into basically a collage, a three-dimensional closet in this case, that could actually be hung on the wall as a piece of art. Here's a little close-up of one of the sections, and you'll see the blue tags. There were 4 boxes or areas inside this box, and each one they put in one of the things about regret, meaning loss and legacy. And so in their regret one, there's this thing about the biggest piece that you can read here is relentlessly authentic. So a person who is struggling with the idea that both they were true, and also how painful that can be in life. Mm. This is another example. This one was where, again, kind of a decorated box. The dark green in the background is a box. The box itself is only maybe about an inch thick. It's more almost like a file folder kind of box. And so during the class, it was easy. They just flip these flat items in. But then this box, this person was really dealing with identity. And you can see if you look sort of around, this is during the building of the box process, but there's in the foreground lots and lots of pictures of individuals and dressed in a certain way and sort of proper kinds of forms. And then in the background, all of those people that are standing up and laying down just all over the box. So this person, through their whole process, was really dealing with identity and what, how much they were tied in with who they were in this world and what they represented in this world, and how difficult that was when they were thinking about death, was their idea of, what parts of who I am really are and will continue to matter across time and even after I'm gone. Hmm. This one is what this class did was we did the boxes thing, although in the back picture you'll see the box that this person picked is very little. It was like one of those old-fashioned French cigarette boxes, so it's maybe not even half an inch thick and maybe 4 inches square. And it was interesting because they folded everything up in little tiny things and stuffed it in their box. There wasn't really even enough room by the end. But then in this class, what we did with the stuff in our boxes, we made collages. So then this person pulled out all these things and put them all over it. So I have the collage in the background and the box just sitting there. It's kind of interesting to me. And I think depending on how cosmic or woo-woo you are about things, it's even has the potential to be interesting for someone. Like, why did you pick such a thin and narrow box to store all of your life's meaning in? You knew at the beginning of this class that this is where, and for some reason, not good or be bad, but just interesting. How do we view our world in a way that's not intellectual? This one is a piece that we do at the end of class. That's the group collage. So we collected all these things over a lot of the class, and some things will be discarded as not so important. People will see trends about the things they picked up, and then they'll see sort of oddball things, or they'll think, well, this really has more to do with death in general than it does with my personal experience of values of life. So we do a group collage that sort of pulls more the ideas of sort of our cultural or our more generic ideas of death kind of culled out of our box and what matters to us. And it brings together a lot of pieces from a whole bunch of different people. So when that collage is finished, you also have an opportunity to sort of see the fears of our culture, or the fears that are prominent in our group, or very differing attitudes. That's one thing that also comes out very interesting, is how some people are very curious, and some people are very like, we better not talk about it or it will happen to us. So just the breadth of perspective of people's, things they've ripped out of magazines and quotes they've saved is just so enlightening, just to see how both similar and completely different we all are about this experience. Then we do a ceremony where we release regrets. So if there are things that people have put in their box that are things that they would like to let go of, then we have a fire ceremony at the end, and we let go of things. And then after that class, what hopefully and sometimes and often happens next is then some sort of pattern or truth is revealed to people, and then they become more clear about wanting to share who they are as a life experience and as illuminating through this process of art some things that are important to them. It becomes easier to share some of these more challenging conversations about dying if how it is brought up is in this context of, look at these interesting things I've discovered about who I am and what matters to me in life. And maybe even check out my box and flip through these pictures with me, or look at this neat collage I made, or whatever. And it becomes not such a direct and assaultive way to then have conversations with other people, and it becomes a little less about the issues of the last moments of your life and death, but more about the continuity of what is meaningful across every step, your life and your end of life as well. So that's my story.
Wow, that's just incredible, Molly. I so enjoyed seeing those pictures. It makes all the difference to be able to actually see the pieces of art that people have created, and how informative they are, and just how beautiful they are, and what a gift you're giving to them by just gathering all these resources together so people can be creative in this way.
Thank you. Yeah. It feels important to get to these really deep issues from a lot of different avenues. And so it's nice to be able to provide a kind of avenue that has been useful to me.
And Donna typed in and asked if you have an outline of your 3-part class that you'd be willing to share with others. She said she'd be interested in doing something similar in her area, but she could also try to connect with you offline about that. I don't.
Okay. I'd be willing to do either with any kind of, I got these materials from Molly sort of acknowledgement, and whichever people feel better. If I'll send them to you, Karen, if you want to distribute them, or, I'd love to talk to people about this. So if you want to send me an email, I'll talk to you in person, but I'm also happy to give it to the list if there is such a thing.
And then this is your, on this slide, conversationsaboutdeath@gmail.com is your email address where someone could write to you.
Yes, correct. And also at mollystuart.com, also at the webpage, the same email address.
Well, what could happen, Molly, if you find that you're suddenly inundated with hundreds of emails that you can't answer, let me know, and then I could email it out to everyone. But it might be that there are a couple of people who are interested in that.
Yeah.
So far, there's still callers on the line. I just wanted to remind you, if anyone has a quick question for Molly, we have a few minutes left. If you press *2 on your keypad, that'll let me know to unmute your line. And then we've had a good response from people typing in their questions, which I want to thank you for that. But Molly, this has really been helpful. And Donna also wrote, yes, the photos add a lot, and Gail as well. Like, this is really, it's really helpful to just see the visual of what you're talking about. And I'm so glad that we did that. Yeah,
it was fun. Excellent.
Yeah, I appreciate the time you spent just putting all of this together for us, so we could see your beautiful place and your studios.
Yeah,
I know if there aren't any more questions, I know you just had a couple of extra slides. Here's someone asked, about music, how you use music, because I had mentioned that you were talking about resources for the dying and music. So.
Yeah. We didn't really talk about that at all, but I'll just briefly. So during this work, through this work, what also often happens is that families that I've worked with in the dying process actually does happen, and people are actually on their deathbed. And so for my local area, and so this probably is not that interesting to your clients, but maybe, some people will want to do that. I've collected resource materials for people who are actually in the dying process. So, for example, I have a photographer on my list who's willing to come over and take family photographs during the time when someone's, in their last couple of days and in their bed and in not their most beautiful state, if that's what the family wants. There's a group that most of you will know already called Threshold Choir, and there is one here in Sacramento. They will come and sing at the bedside of the dying. So I have a group of these people who have special expertise in being, just a presence without infringing too much on a family's experience, but who will do things like that at the bedside, a massage therapist, people who chant or read spiritual text, singers. Some people have music that they'll pick out, and oftentimes I do an exercise where people explore what kinds of things really bring them comfort, whatever that is. So for some people, there's certain kinds of music that really bring comfort and other kinds that don't. And so in sort of preparing oneself, this is a super advanced part of it, of what could be an advanced directive, but what are the ways that you want to be comforted when you're in your dying process? So, for example, some people really have ideas about temperature. Like, I'm always cold no matter what. And when I'm in the ICU, I think about the people in the ICU, and I think they must be freezing. That's my interpretation of how awful it would be to be in an ICU, is that you would be cold all the time. So in my advanced directive, for example, I would say, even if I'm unconscious, my guess is that I would want you folks to err on the side of keeping me warm, because my experience is that I'm always cold. Now, it might be that in my dying I'm going to end up being too hot, but in my preparing for my dying, what is worrisome to me is the idea of being cold, and therefore in preparing for my dying, I hope that you people will be concerned about whether I'm too cold. And that might be the comfort that I get. And so the same thing about certain kinds of music. Some people like classical music. Some people find it screechy and annoying. Some people like to be touched. Some people don't like to be touched. So all of those kinds of things, or dark, funny rooms, or dark rooms, or the TV on or not. There are lots of things about our everyday life that we use to soothe ourselves. And those, for the most part, are often the exact same things that we need to soothe ourselves when we're struggling with dying.
Mm-hmm. I noticed we have a caller with a question. BJ, we're almost out of time, but do you mind taking a question quickly?
No, I'd love to.
Okay, so BJ, I am going to unmute your line so you can ask a question, if I can remember how to do it.
Yeah,
okay.
I'll be very quick. Hi, Karen. Thank you again for
Hi, BJ.
A wonderful end of life university talk. And Molly, thank you for what you're doing. I'm very interested in this too, and about just maybe kind of basically, I'm sure you're connected with the hospice, but as far as just kind of any other kind of marketing, that's what I'm always thinking about. I live in a huge metroplex area, but I'm always looking for different ways to market. There's obviously the assisted livings and hospice and things, but if you had any other ways, again, and thank you for what you're doing, this wonderful workshop. It's something that I want to do. It just sounds great, so thank you.
Woohoo, good. You're welcome. Thank you for the compliment. I have had the same. I actually don't work with hospice at all, and even I have found with the nursing home things and the hospital also where I am that for this process, for the most part, I'm, quote, too late. The hospital requires everybody to fill out a blank advance directive form when they register for any kind of surgery or any kind of hospital stay, and so it's all just, down there when you're filling out your insurance forms. The people who are in assisted living here they're required to have an advance directive in place before they're in assisted living, so most of that just happens in sort of a paperworky way. I'm very interested in that Medicare has now signed something for end-of-life conversations. So I'm hoping / wondering that now that there's money available to be paid to providers, whoever they are, the medical industry or the insurance company, that probably there will be an opening for more of this. But for the most part, what I have done here is, I have a pretty rich Facebook community, and most of it's local, and I'm very involved in the arts community, and so I actually get a lot of people who more from art-related things who just are curious about dying. I've put up posters at Starbucks and coffee places and things like that, and I've had people tell me that they won't put them up there because it's too creepy and they don't want their customers to have to think about it. So it is an extremely challenging issue, and what I have decided is that I'm not really going to go beat my head trying to change everybody's idea. I'm going to really try to super richly serve the people who are already curious enough to ask the questions in a way that evangelizes the worth of it, as opposed to trying to go out and talk people into coming. But that's just my, style.
Oh, I totally agree, and I understand that because, say, for instance, in the past, since I've been really, getting just drawn to this, I'm a trained hospice volunteer, but just let's say for like death cafes, I mentioned it at a local, really a progressive church, and the minister said, again, like you're saying, too creepy, and again, I always have a joke with myself is that, again, I'm in a large areas, like there's always the Unitarian church, they're always open to these things,
I have done it at the Unitarian Church many times, and they are open to it. And I have found other churches to be open to it, and other kinds of community groups. Like we have like older people's social things, where they take poetry classes and do exercise things and stuff like that. And so you can throw a free, mostly all the class stuff in my area anyway, turns out to be pretty close to free, or that you have to, make a big donation to whoever's hosting you. But I consider that sort of feeding the ground for people who then are more inclined to do some deeper work.
Absolutely, and it was just nice to hear what, again, I feel like that you just kind of affirmed kind of some of my instincts about this too, again, because it's a difficult but necessary subject, and then the fact that you've added this art component to it, that it will make it just so much more meaningful. So again, thank you for what you're doing.
You're welcome. Thank you, BJ.
Okay, take care now.
Thanks, BJ. Goodbye. Well, gosh, I think we're about out of time. I don't know if you wanted to show the last couple slides you have, or if we.
Oh, I'll just show them quickly, just because maybe people will be. So here's an example. These are the legacy projects some people end up doing with their own stuff. So in terms of creating a legacy, these are all old neckties, and people get their grandfather's neckties, or they clean out their dad's closet or whatever, and they have fond memories of that. Maybe often children have given most of the neckties to their parents. So ways to use those for things. These are often I find that families have lots of stuff in their house, and then they have lots of kids. Let's say they have a set of their parents' wedding dishes and 4 daughters. And we can't give, the wedding dishes to everybody. One person gets them, another person doesn't, blah, blah, blah. Or nobody wants to use old-fashioned dishes and china anymore, even though they have a sentimental feeling. So these are totems, we call them. And then a family can get together and they can sort of look through all of the items and make something representative out of different pieces than each family member can take home. So these gals, their mother had a lot of crystal champagne dishes and candy dishes and punch bowls and all this stuff, and so they made these glass towers, and then each one of the daughters got to take one home to their garden, and they didn't really want to use all that crystal in their house. This is examples. These aren't examples of actually my customers, but something that I do a lot, which are quilts made out of old T-shirts. So again, not a very arty-farty project. You don't have to be a super artist to make this happen, but you just cut a big square out of the front and the back of the T-shirts and sew them all together, and then you have a nice, cozy. My kid, I had a family that did this for like a 19-year-old kid that got killed in a skiing accident, and so they had all of their sons' T-shirts around with all his favorite things on him to watch TV and cuddle up with next to. So some people do more formal things like writing a book, or oftentimes I'll have people write a statement kind of their value, something, the most important thing I learned in my life or something like that, and then essentially put it in the form of a letter to the people. So there are more and less artistic things to do, but some people find doing things with their stuff to be a very, kinesthetic and physically comforting sort of experience to have. So those are just some examples of that.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you. Oh, Molly, it's been so much fun. I really enjoyed this, and I love it that you've inspired us with this idea of collage art, because you don't have to be a painter or great at drawing pictures. Any one of us should be able to make collages, and so that's really an inspiration to me to try to utilize more artwork for all of us in the work that we do. So
we don't want to scare off any non-artists.
No, but I can't thank you enough, Molly, for putting all the slides together and for taking this time out today to share.
Thank you, Karen. It was really fun for me too.